Alright everyone, we gotta talk about the Dalai Lama, who's clearly a horrible bigot. I'm just joking. That's what's being said by a few of the pink-haired freaks of the world. It's not, the mainline left doesn't hate the Dalai Lama. They still like the dude, more or less. I can remember when the left universally applauded him because he stood up to human rights abuses and authoritarianism in China. The Chinese government, the communists there, even taking the draconian step of commanding him to reincarnate into the body of a Communist Party member, and it was very funny. And it's like it's not not how reincarnation works. He's sort of, you know, the representative of that mentality over there in the Asian region. It's funny because when people are saying, "Well, the Dalai Lama's like a Western pawn now. He's dog whistling to fascists," that's literally the same claim that's been made for years after he criticized the government of the nation of China and supported the concept of an independent Tibet. Literally, that's what the Communist Party of China has been saying now for the better part of 2 decades. I can remember being a kid, and it's like, oh, Dalai Lama has gotten the anger up of the Chinese government in the wake of Tiananmen Square or whatever. Back in the 90s, back during the Clinton administration into the Bush years, China really hates the Dalai Lama. So literally, you are, in the most literal sense, parroting communist propaganda when you claim that the Dalai Lama is a racist or like a CIA asset or something. It's the same exact claim. I mean, identical in every possible sense of the word. Totally identical. Here's what I would say, though. The Dalai Lama's concept of the refugee/migrant crisis in Europe, for the most part, is exactly, I think, the truth. I think it's a bit more nuanced than that. For instance, not everyone entering Europe is a refugee. Many of these people are economic migrants. They're not fleeing from war. They're not fleeing from oppression. But here's the other part, and this is where he didn't elaborate quite as much. He probably should have pointed this out. The West does indeed, as he says, have a responsibility to help legitimate refugees from Libya and Syria and places like that on a temporary basis, which is his caveat. He's saying, no, fundamentally they need to go back and rebuild their home countries. I think that's merciful. I think that's a good thing. And here's why the first part of his claim makes sense. Some people are saying we have no responsibility. We do, because we caused the problems. Now, I realize it wasn't the average American. Like, the average American opposed fucking Syria over, opposed destroying Libya, opposed trying to destroy Egypt. Obama was the one that wanted to do these. The globalists wanted to. Neoliberals wanted to. They wanted their proxy wars. They wanted to destroy competitors that were getting a little bit too independent, I think, for their tastes. Assad, Gaddafi, some of these others. This is why we invaded Iraq. It had nothing to do with WMDs. It had nothing to do with liberation. If you think that, you're a total fool. No, our wars in the Middle East and our strikes and our regime change coup attempts and things like that, successful in Libya, not successful in Egypt, successful in Iraq, not successful in Syria, those have caused millions and millions of people's homes to be destroyed. That's directly caused. The United States government has funded and trained Al-Qaeda members, Taliban members, and the so-called moderate rebels in Syria, the FSA, which are Sharia-loving Islamo-fascist nuts. They're religious zealots. The only difference between them and ISIS is that they're willing to work with us because they want to kill ISIS and they want to take over Syria. ISIS is a post-national, caliphate-loving sort of group. They want a multinational approach, a globalized form of Sharia in which they rebuild the old Islamic empires of many centuries ago. The Syrian moderate rebels, so-called, use the same tactics, kill civilians at the same rate, deploy chlorine on a regular basis. They literally use chemical warfare. But they're willing to take our guns, and they want to be nationalistic. They want Syria to be, you know, still a nation state in the normal sense. They just want it to be like Libya is right now, which is to say, ass backwards. They want to destroy the civilization that's been built there by Assad's regime in part, by you could say the remnants of the British-backed regimes over time, that understood that it was necessary that the leadership of any country that's going to be stable needs to know what it's doing and not be run by theocrats. They comprehended this. The British were all sorts of fucked up in the post-colonial era, carving things apart. That's one thing that they did at least understand. For a long time working in places like Syria, or among the so-called reformist Ba'athist movements that replaced the British pawns that were in Iraq, you know, many decades before. But here's the thing. We do have a responsibility to help these people, but we do not have any responsibility to permanently settle refugees in our countries when we could be trying to stop making their own countries piles of shit. We should be restraining ourselves from bombing foreign nations. If Syria hadn't been in the midst of a massive civil war, inflamed and antagonized in part by U.S. foreign policy, there wouldn't be millions of Syrian refugees. If Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama hadn't screwed over Gaddafi, Libya would still be stable. Yeah, they'd be run by an authoritarian prick. Who cares? Who are they run by right now? Oh, that's right, multiple authoritarian pricks. Only now they regularly enslave people, live in squalor, there's no development there whatsoever, exotic disease climbs back into what used to be a nice, peaceful urban setting. It was beginning to develop. It was beginning to liberalize in some cases. Gaddafi had given up all the 80s era sort of kill the Westerner rhetoric. He had given that up. He was trying to play nice with the West. Big mistake. I think there's a reason why Kim Jong-un is reluctant to give up his nuclear weapons now, isn't there? You can't blame that on Trump. Blame Bush and Obama's foreign policy. They're the ones that have started this bullshit. The last two presidents, totaling 16 years of governance of our foreign policy, has been sheer ineptitude and nonstop warmongering. So yeah, we have a little bit of a responsibility to try to right those wrongs. We start by keeping them out at the ballot box. No more Bushes, no more Clintons, and there are a hell of a lot of Bushes and Clintons that have different surnames, let me tell you that much. I can think of a few. McCain, thankfully, now he's in hell. Mitt Romney, people like that. Les Wexley, I think, after yesterday. He saw an Obama speech and this massive multi-billionaire decided to defect from the Republican Party. So the Democrats are the party of rich, octogenarians. Okay, I can accept that. That makes sense. On the other side, you've got basically all of the Democrats, all the Bidens and all the Warrens and all these other idiots. Very rich, very bought out, corporatistic. They like censorship and they like proxy war. That's what it's about. Keep them out of office. We won't have this problem as often. The Dalai Lama is saying there's mercy, but there's also a responsibility. Just because they're a refugee doesn't mean that you have to admit them in on a permanent basis. Refugees, they're supposed to go back and rebuild their country. Guess what? We can help them. We should be helping them. We're partially responsible for their problem. But we're not responsible for having more problems here when we can't even... these countries seem to think that you're a bigot if you even believe in a vetting process to determine if they're even a refugee. And in some cases, someone from Libya or something, how are you even going to tell? There's been such a breakdown in order that a lot of these kids that are going to be born in these war-torn areas, there's no documentation. They're basically, they can claim what their name is and say where they're from. They're not going to have any paperwork for it. It's impossible to tell where they're from. They've been displaced internally within their own countries because of the West's own warmongering, shitty foreign policy. If anyone's a bigot, if anyone's supporting totalitarianism, it's been the Obamas and the Bushes here, and idiots like David Cameron and Angela Merkel and the Hollandes and Macrons in France and people like that. They're the totalitarians. They're the fascists. They're the ones that want to see everyone miserable. It just so happens they also tend to be the same people that want to censor everything online. I wonder why. Could it be because otherwise people like me point out all the shit that they've done? Like we have for the Bushes and Clintons for now, a considerable length of time, going on decade number 2? Yeah, I think that's probably why. It has a lot more to do with that, exposing abuse of power, exposing, the shitty, hypocritical double standards of the corporate media and things like that. The corporate media, they don't bat an eye. They think it's wonderful that Gaddafi gets dragged through the streets and burned. Oh, Libya's liberated. Hillary Clinton told us so. Meanwhile, they have a problem with every foreign policy tidbit that's happening now. Peace might break out in Korea. It'd be a terrible time for all the warmongers. It's fundamentally what it's about. So yeah, it's funny though, to see at least that very small, shrieking, vocal, pink-haired minority of the left claim that the Dalai Lama is like a Western pawn. So you're literally saying what the government of China has been saying since I was a kid. They've said the same thing. Oh my God, the Dalai Lama supports an independent Tibet? Doesn't want us to brutalize and exploit our population? Thinks that people should, have freedom because otherwise they can't advance spiritually? Oh my God, what a terrible person. We command you to reincarnate within China. No, you're not allowed to reincarnate over in Nepal or India or whatever. You have to reincarnate here. It's very, very funny. The Dalai Lama should visit the U.S. again. Unlike the Pope, who's falling out of favor, the Dalai Lama slowly building a reputation for knowing what he's fucking talking about. It's very funny for people who, you know, not that long ago, they're like, oh, the Dalai Lama, so peaceful, tolerant, diverse, vibrant, because, you know, he's not from the West. A wonderful guy, you know, he supports independence struggles and the liberation of women. He doesn't want to stone gay people. He's a good guy. They applauded him. They looked up to him in a way. They had, like, Dalai Lama t-shirt and shit like that, sort of like they do for Che, only at least it was for a person that's not violent. Now they like the government of China, with all of its authoritarian human rights abuses, its intranet. You know, this same left, I bet that they wouldn't be too happy if we adopted the exact same style of internet China has. The New York Times, by the way, has openly pushed for this on multiple occasions. Oh yeah, China got it right on the internet, we got it wrong. The limits of free speech. We must stop tolerating the intolerant. Gotta censor things, otherwise intolerant people will censor us. Makes a whole lot of sense. We've got to be violent against these people or else they might take control and become violent. It's very, very, very caveman-like mentality. That's about all. Peace out.